Hi, this is Corey McCrae, the Senator for the 45th Legislative District, and you're listening to the Conduit Street Podcast, my go-to source for the latest news and insight on state and local government in Maryland.
Hello and welcome to the Conduit Street Podcast. Kevin Kinnally here with Michael Sanderson. Michael, we are recording live from the Mako offices. Well into session now. How you feeling?
It's nice to be back, honestly. We're going to have later today, we're going to have the Mako Legislative Committee back in our meeting room at our building. It's the first time in close to 4 years doing that. So I don't know. It feels nice to be back in the studios in the big complex.
Right.
The special sound room and so forth. Plus, we got a good episode for today.
We do. Today we have a very special guest with us and a very, very interesting issue to talk about with her. One that got a packed room at our last conference and is going to get a lot of attention in this legislative session. So with us today to talk about data centers in Maryland, we welcome Frederick County Executive Jessica Fitzwater. Welcome, Madam County Executive.
Thank you so much, guys. I'm really happy to be here and here with Mako and here to talk about a critical issue.
Well, that's why we're here. Our listeners have turned out to be nerds on policy and politics and into this kind of stuff. And when we smell a tricky issue that sort of, ends up with tension of one area versus another, and the stuff that's complicated, right? We already did the easy stuff. It's the complicated stuff that's not yet worked out. And this it lands right in the bullseye for that. So I think this is a really good content. Kevin teed this up a little bit, but can you start us off a little bit? You're in your first term as county executive. Tell us a little bit how you became county executive in Frederick County. You're the second county executive to serve in Frederick County. What was your path getting to there? And tell us a little bit about that.
Well, from a fellow nerd, I'm glad to know that I'm in good company with your listeners. But yeah, so I am actually born and raised in Washington County, but I've lived in Maryland my entire life and been in Frederick for almost 20 years. And I'm an educator. So my background is over 17 years as a public school music teacher. And I really came to paying attention to local government and politics because of being an advocate for our students and for our schools. And I learned very quickly that being a teacher is a highly politicized profession, and that everything about our jobs and our schools are just those decisions are made by elected officials, whether you're talking to your local school board, state and the federal government. So I started showing up at budget hearings and giving public comment, getting on the bus down to Annapolis, and really recognize that local government is, we say all the time, where rubber meets the road, but it's where those decisions really impact our working families and impact our students and opportunities for them in their own communities. And so I decided to step up and run for the county council in 2014. Very honored to serve 2 terms, and then ran for county executive to make sure that we could keep moving things forward for Frederick County.
So I can't help but get a quick question in as a native of Washington County.
Oh, yes. Washington.
So that's what I was going to ask about.
Washington.
Actually, it was Washington County night in Annapolis last night, and I was at their event and saw some of the county commissioners and their delegation and a bunch of business leaders and so forth. And I noticed the R is extremely present it's attached to your native Washington County background. So you might have excised it a little bit. Maybe that's part of the migration to Frederick County, but back home, is it still Washington?
I would say it's still prevalent. I have very strong memories of my 5th grade teacher at Old Forge Elementary School definitely having the hard R. I'll say my Maryland O is strong for sure because I hear it and I get called out on it. But I guess the Washington part bypassed me a little bit.
So it's like if you're up there for a few days, it easily comes back. Right. I get that. So County Executive, Frederick County is very interesting in a lot of ways. One of them is that it has been a very high growth county for the last 20 years or so. And that means you get to face all these challenges of growth management and infrastructure funding. You're still in all those areas, right?
Absolutely. We are the fastest growing county in the state of Maryland. And while we're seeing some other counties actually declining in population, we are growing, and we're growing in all the ways. So our student enrollment is by far growing faster than any other county. Over the past 5 years, we grew by almost 10%. The closest county behind that being Carroll County at just about 2.5%. So you can really see that we're an outlier there. Our senior population is also growing much faster than the state average. So that shows us that we have a lot of opportunity, but of course some challenges to make sure that we're really meeting the needs of everyone. The good news is we are completely up for the challenge. We have incredible relationships with all of our 12 municipalities, but we also just have this special sauce in Frederick County of the people there. We have a thriving nonprofit sector, really great small businesses, a lot of philanthropy organizations, and we have really strong relationships, and everybody really does come together wanting to find solutions, wanting to be creative, to think about how we can make life better for people. And for me, I think government's role is, where do we need to step up and do more, and where do we need to get out of the way? When do we need to be the convener? And that is something that, we've explored in a lot of ways through my transition team process, through trying to build stakeholder groups when we're talking about issues like agritourism, or when we're talking about issues like data centers.
And Frederick, you have such a rural component, but then you have all this growth, right? And that's got to be like part and parcel. That's one of the biggest challenges, is managing that. You have people over here who say one thing, and then you have people over here kind of driving innovation, wanting to bring things into the future. That's got to be a challenge, especially for a county executive, trying to make it all work and trying to make sure that everybody's happy.
It is definitely a challenge, but it's one that I truly enjoy because, look, we often get caught in these conversations where things are really black and white, or you care about the environment or you just want to build everywhere. Right. And reality doesn't look like that, and folks that have been doing this work for a long time know that. And so I think it's critically important that we try to change the tone of these conversations and bring people together to find common ground and really grow in a smart way. So when we say smart growth, it's not just a catchphrase, but that we're really thinking about what does that mean for our communities. We are really leading the way in planning in Frederick County. I mean, we've had Secretary Jake Day out to tour some of what we're trying to do for redevelopment, and it's really, really exciting. Because we're the largest landmass county in the state of Maryland, we actually have the opportunity to do this right. We are preserving our farmland at record rates. We have the strongest forest resource ordinance in the state, but we also have the opportunity to grow in and around our municipalities and our more urban areas, to put residential and commercial growth where it belongs and not touch the land that we know that we need to preserve for our future.
Amen to that. And that's what we're all about. And so while we are interested in you in the county, we think our listeners will really be interested to hear about data centers. Again, this is something that's gotten a lot of attention. These are sexy. They're high-tech facilities that serves as arms of the internet, or the big media companies and so forth. And, they need server and storage capacity. They need a lot of it, right? And they need that somewhere. And Frederick County has entered into this fray already. And boy, there's a lot to this story. How does it start? How did you get into this? How did this all come to be? And then we can sort of walk through that and then how we got to where we are now.
Sure. Well, we are creating data as we speak with this podcast.
Yes.
And everybody who's listening on their cell phones or on their computers, this isn't going away. We are constantly creating data. The demand is really just going to continue to grow exponentially with what's happening in AI and what we're going to see, moving at such an exponential rate. It's almost hard to wrap your mind around. And that has been one of the challenges when you think about how quickly this industry is changing. We've talked a lot of times in Frederick County about how in some areas we're really ahead of the curve. We already have legislation on the books for critical digital infrastructure, so that there are regulations there right now before this industry really has a strong foothold in our community. That has not been the case across the country. In fact, as we've been doing research on best practices, it's really hard to find that out there because there's just been a lot of either just open doors and here they come, or figuring it out as you go along. But because the industry is moving so quickly, it's hard to also not feel like you are behind. Our commitment in Frederick County with putting together this data center work group that has been working since the summer was really to say, look, we can lead and we can be an example of how you can do this right. We can look at what the community benefits are to having this industry in your community, but still protect the quality of life, protect the environment, and that public health, safety, and welfare that we are charged to protect in local government. So we are, we've brought together an incredibly diverse group of stakeholders, folks from the industry, who are coming at it from an environmental background, farmers, labor, really looking at this from all sides, bringing in guest speakers, going on field trips down to Northern Virginia, hearing from our fire and rescue folks about challenges there, talking to our folks in energy and environment, really looking at this from all sides so that when this work group wraps up, we have strong recommendations on what do we need to do to strengthen our current regulations, where are we going to allow these in Frederick County, and also where are we not going to allow them? And what kind of community benefits do we expect from this industry if things are going to continue to grow? So that's what I feel like our obligation is, and I'm really proud of the work that we've done to bring people together and say, look, data centers are here, so let's do this right, and let's really have a robust conversation about it.
I guess the first step there, though, is recognizing that this kind of opportunity, the landing of a data center that's going to have a footprint in the county, is different in a number of ways than just another corporate occupant. It's different than just a warehouse or a small manufacturer or a grocery store, right? I mean, we're good at planning and zoning around ordinary development, but every once in a while, technology changes the game, and frequently public policy needs to catch up with that. And that seems to be exactly what's happening here. So, let's set the stage a little bit about what a data center looks and feels like. We're not talking about like an empty warehouse with a bunch of blade servers and that's it. Like nobody works there. These come with jobs. There's a bunch of infrastructure that comes with it too. So help paint that picture a little bit for our listeners.
Absolutely. I mean, the economic impacts are really huge. And we are talking about a lot of jobs and good paying jobs. Right. It's not just the construction jobs, the maintenance jobs, the operational jobs, right? Some remote, but also a lot on the campus. And the great thing about what's happening with Quantum Frederick and the location of Quantum Loophole, that the data center campus that is currently being worked on, is its location. So it's on a site, the former site of the East Alcoa plant, which is really one of the kind of dirtiest industries. There's brownfields. There's been a lot of it's an interesting history on the property. But because it's one of the largest tracts of this type of industrial zone land, really on the East Coast, it allows for this large master plan data center campus, but still to have the things that are needed to make sure that there are buffers, that there's active ag land around it, that we're thinking about things like the impacts of noise and the impacts on the landscape. There are a lot of things that make this location something that actually helps us as we're looking at those regulations and thinking about the adjoining properties and what it will add to that part of the county. So we're very sensitive to that, and I think that compared to where we have seen some of these go in other jurisdictions, it's a good start. But we have to be very thoughtful about, as the industry grows, where we are, as I said, are not going to allow these to go.
Right. And so, I mean, up to this point, it's a story of trying to attract businesses, but we all do that. But data is different, right? All those servers and stations need a nice, cool environment. So that means a lot of fans, a lot of power. Water. Right. And they need a very reliable power supply too, right? You can't have a data center go down for 6 hours, right? That can't happen. And it seems like, I mean, you mentioned Northern Virginia earlier, and we know there's a big presence there. And I think part of this is Frederick County they can literally tap into the Northern Virginia sector, right? So that's why I think Frederick County is attractive. You've already mentioned the site and what you're doing there and trying to make sure that you're doing everything right environmentally and that people around the site feel comfortable and there are buffers. I mean, this issue now becomes backup generators, right? I mean, we talked about all the power you need, the water, but now we're getting into an issue of backup generators, and there seems to be, the Public Service Commission at the state level has their opinions on what that would mean and whether or not you'd have to go through a whole licensing round and get a CPCN. We'll talk about that. But that's the issue at this point, is the backup generators, right? You've talked about the site. You've talked about doing everything the right way. Now this just comes down to equipment. Is that what the issue is right now?
Well, that's certainly the issue that the state is looking at. And we have seen Governor Moore's bill on this issue that we know dropped just a couple of days ago. And it has been very interesting because a lot of the conversation, even locally, has been about energy production, energy consumption. And the counties don't regulate that, right? And sometimes people don't want to hear that. It sounds like we're deflecting, but there are so many layers to this, and we've been very focused on what is our county's role in making sure we're being responsible. But there are all these other pieces that are regulated in other ways. So based on the bill, looking at backup generation as kind of a separate category or an exempted category, and this doesn't just affect data centers. This affects hospitals, emergency operations. I mean, anything that have that kind of mission central kind of operations that really have to be 24/7. And we're also talking about emergency backup, so it's not something that is running constantly. You're talking about maybe testing it out several times a year, and then in the case of an emergency. And if at a data center there's truly an outage that's big enough to take that out, we're probably dealing with a lot of other things also. So it'll be interesting to see as this bill moves through committee and moves through the session this year. But that's been a piece that isn't something that the county has. Again, not our role to regulate, but definitely an interesting piece of the puzzle and of the conversation.
So I guess I read through the findings from the state's Public Service Commission. So that's the body that oversees power companies and electric grids and so forth. So you're right to say that the state basically owns policy over energy in ways that local governments don't. Even the siting of major facilities is really a state decision. There's reasons for that. It goes back decades and decades, mostly about the notion that you might not be able to find a community who would want to have a big oil burning power plant. But if no community would say yes through their local zoning, you could end up with a grid with insufficient energy. So the state said, we'll be the ones who site the nuclear power plant or the next big thing, right? But we've been seeing this. I mean, this has been a subtext on the siting of big solar facilities for some time. And now we're seeing the same application, in part because I guess there are two ways to look at this. But if you have a campus of tech-related facilities that each needs a backup generator, it's going to run on diesel, which is kind of a dirty energy in some regards.
And that's the only thing available right now, right? Like there's no other option other than
there's
diesel.
No way to do this with a solar panel or with a battery and so forth today. Maybe maybe 5-15 years, who knows? But for the moment, the only viable way to have the backup energy is through diesel. And if you say, well, our campus is going to have 18 buildings or whatever the number is, the State Public Service Commission feels like the letter of the law tells them we need to stitch together each of those generators, consider it one unit, and we have to treat it at its capacity, not its intended use. So if you start saying, well, there's multiple separate generators, this isn't just one house or one hospital, but all these different buildings, they need air conditioning, they need access to water and a permit for that, but then they need approval for all this energy. They're looking at this like it's a giant power plant that's going to run all day long. And I don't think it's because they hate the idea of data infrastructure coming to Maryland. They're just reading the letter of the law that says this is a big facility, it's our call, and this probably doesn't pass our test.
And what I think is interesting too, though, I think once this all boiled over, you started to realize, hey, hospitals have this issue too. And so universities may have this issue. It's not just data centers. So I think there's already stuff out there that you could say we need to stitch all that together and create this new process for it. But, it's not just the data centers. And I think that was an important point of all of this is like this stuff already exists. These are backups. They're not running all the time. Like you said, Michael, it's different from your traditional energy generation stuff. So I think you guys are doing it the right way, obviously. And now it comes down to a bill in the General Assembly to sort of tell the PSC to stand down on this one. And really, I think the data center industry will tell you that unless this gets worked out, they're not going to do business in Maryland. And they've already invested a lot in Frederick. Obviously, the county has a lot on the line, and you've put in a lot of work. So is that what you're hearing, essentially? Like, this is now the entire state could be in jeopardy if we can't fix this problem, because we know there are other states these folks can go to.
Yeah, I mean, what we are hearing, and I think the governor certainly has heard it because of this making this a priority, is that let me say one thing. I don't fault the PSC, and I think you are right. I think it is they are interpreting what is on the books the way that they are charged to do. But it is we do, treating backup generation the same as something that is constantly operating. It is something that is worth exploring.
Sure.
And it's certainly something that is impacting the industry and their ability to move forward here.
Right. So, it's an impasse now, and maybe there is a solution on the way. You mentioned that the governor has just weighed in with a bill designed to resolve this controversy. It's Senate Bill 474. I have not really dug into that bill yet, but that puts this whole issue right before the General Assembly to try and thread the needle here, right? And I think threading the needle means don't give up the environmental stewardship, but find a way to say yes to this narrowly, right? Treat this as what it is and not something that runs all day. And it fits with the governor's "It's Maryland's time" message, right? We want to be innovative. We want to be in the tech business. And so I think, maybe we need to move sideways and then move ahead. So we figure this out, but move forward. But it does certainly fit in with what the governor has said he wants to do. And I think, they realized right away that this was a problem and they needed to weigh in and they needed to work with the PSC to resolve this, because also this is a lot of revenue, right, for Maryland. And for Frederick County, this is real tax revenue. These are real jobs, good paying jobs. This is something we don't want to push out of our state, I don't think.
I will just say, so two things. One, on the second piece that you just mentioned, the revenue for the state, absolutely. And that's why we saw the state do what they did with the tax credit. Right. And so I think that's why this also plays in, is thinking about, what is the message that we are sending, and making sure that the right and the left hand are talking to each other as we're trying to, attract different industries here. But specifically in Frederick County, we actually, as part of our data center work group, had MuniCap do just an independent assessment just based on our current property tax rate, what kind of status quo, that we could expect over $37 million in property tax revenue once the current quantum loophole site is built out. We have talked a lot about Northern Virginia. There are definitely lessons learned and directions we don't want to head based on some of the decisions they've made, but they have more than 50%, and I wish I had the exact number, of their revenue coming from their commercial base. In Frederick County, ours has declined. It's about 22% of our property tax revenue coming from commercial versus residential. So the services that people expect, the growth coming, being more on the backs of the residents versus the commercial, and the opportunities within this industry and really beyond, when the other industries that we're attracting to Frederick County, building up that commercial base is really important, I think, for any local. So that's definitely a piece of it as well.
Yeah. Well, and developing your commercial tax base can sound like a numbers game to some degree. Like, this would generate dollars that we can use to invest in these various places, and that's true. But that's like the surface layer of a story, which means you have a successful, thriving business in your community that brings good workers, well-paid people with education, that brings kids to the schools, these are people who are going to want to get a haircut, and they're going to want to buy a sandwich, and they're going to be part of the local economy and part of the local culture, and all that is to the good. Mm-hmm. So you can look at it as a matter of numbers, but it's also as a matter of back to where we started. This is a county that's trying to have a sensible plan to grow, and you don't want the growth to be entirely residential and not the framework for it. It can't be all commercial or all industrial without the framework for it. You want to have that balance. I think back to my childhood playing Sim City and clicking buttons and all these sort of, but seriously,
Roller Coaster Tycoon.
Yeah, right, exactly. But it's like you get to play the real game at the real level, but it's managing all those sorts of things in a reasonable way. And this isn't a company saying we want to bring these good jobs to your jurisdiction, but we want to dump battery acid in your stream and terrify your environment. This isn't that at all. And it's back to that question of the generator that's going to be used like once a quarter for a test. For an hour and a half, and then 15 hours when there's one bad storm. And that's its entire use for the year. And right now, our regulators don't have a lane to treat things that way. You'd like to think that this legislation or something like it can create that lane where you can say, sure, on the grand scale, we got to be worried about environmental effects, but for backup sort of stuff, let's look at them in a reasonable context, not in 24/7, 365, right?
Yeah, it makes total sense. And it's not just the data center and those jobs, but we know when you have a giant campus like that, that's going to attract other jobs that are sort of ancillary to the data centers, right? Yeah. So it really is an economic development issue. But also, I have to say, look, you understand the pressures with the blueprint, and we're looking at transportation cuts, right? the county you're trying to raise revenue to pay for all these things, to pay for progressive ideas, to fund the blueprint, to make sure that you can backfill any transportation cuts that are potentially on the table. So really, we need the flexibility to do that. Yeah. This is the right way to do it. You're working with all the right people. These people are going to come in. It sounds like they want to partner with the county. They don't want to be bad actors. They want to do it the right way. So to me, like, this is exactly what counties should be doing, and we need the ability and the flexibility to do that, again, so that we can do all the things that we want to do to make this the most attractive place to live, work, and play, Maryland as a whole, right?
That's the team we're on, right?
Absolutely. And, I really do think it gets back to what we talked about really at the beginning of, trying to step away from that kind of black and white conversation when you're talking about whatever it is, whether it's growth, whether it's, attracting a new industry, whether it's just, anything with transportation, with schools, we just kind of dig our heels in sometimes. And if you just pause and listen and have the conversation, and that was really the goal with this work group, is to say, like, it doesn't have to be this, like, stop, we don't ever want you here, or, oh my God, here they come and our community is going to be ruined. You can take a pause, you can have the conversations, and I really do believe that we will get to a place where we can leverage the benefits that this industry will bring, some of the things that you just talked about, and still preserve Frederick County's quality of life, the environment and our agricultural preservation, and all the things that we really hold dearly in Frederick County. So that's our goal. And we're, and it really does impact not just our community, but the entire state with some of the things before the General Assembly this session.
That's a perfect capsule on this issue and where it fits in your goal as a leader in the county, a county with all these growth pressures. So I think that wraps up really well. I want to say one more thing out of context, because I didn't know this before you mentioned it earlier in this conversation, but if the site for this main project that's underway in Frederick is itself a brownfield site, I mean,
that's a big deal.
This is turning a negative into a positive. For our listeners who aren't familiar with this whole lexicon of environmental law, a brownfields area is basically a designated area that's had some sort of contamination or difficulty, and in a lot of cases, you are just out of options for how can you turn that back into a productive area. I mean, think of places like mountains that have been strip mined in West Virginia and Ohio and places like that. You look at that, like, there's nothing you can build there. The soil is bad. You couldn't build a school. You couldn't put a park, other things like that. Like, we're trying to find good productive uses for brownfields areas in downtown and in rural areas. The idea of saying, hey, this is a little bit secluded and it's a little away, and with some buffers and ag around it, we could turn it into productive technology with good jobs. Holy cow, that's turning a bunt into a home run. So I don't want that to be lost in this conversation, that this is actually taking one of the weak spots in your land plan and saying this could become now a showcase instead of a basket case. Love it.
Showcase instead of a basket case. I might have to steal that, Michael. I will say Frederick County has a reputation for thinking this way, though. We actually have a huge solar array on our landfill that has been there for a few years now. It powers our electric buses, of which we have, I think, we were leading the counties on that. I'm not sure if we still are, and some of our buildings as well. So we are always looking for ways to take lemons and make lemonade, if you will.
And I mean, it is a really important point, because the state wants to incentivize, like get back to solar. Like, we'd rather put solar, these giant arrays, on brownfields, gray fields, rooftops, rather than like prime and productive soils, right? So this is the same thing on a much bigger scale, right? And so I think that is a really important point to highlight. This is a brownfield site. It can't be used for anything else. This is the perfect use. Like, again, I think we're checking all the boxes here as I talk through this with you, right? It makes total sense to me. I'm glad the administration sees that and is going to weigh in on this. We'll see what happens. But hopefully we can get a smart compromise here so we can move this forward and end the story on a positive note. So
you'll be in Annapolis. I'm sure this bill's going to be up for public hearing. We'll have lots of stakeholders show up. I'm sure the environmental community will have their say, and there might be some caution flags along the way, and sometimes these turn into work groups and so forth. But I want everyone in Annapolis to hear about the Frederick County experience. Yes. You brought all these stakeholders together. You said, we're going to do this the smart way and the right way. And you lead with your strong case. And I love that's going to help set up this debate in the right way. So thanks so much for joining us for this conversation. I thought it was great for our listeners, but honestly, this is just interesting policy, and we dig that.
glad I could fill your nerd bucket this morning, Michael.
Yeah, we appreciate it. This is an ongoing theme of technology and government struggling to catch up with regulations. Right, technology moves fast, especially in this industry. But we will leave it there for today. Again, thank you, Madam County Executive. This was a great conversation, and it does tell the story. As always, for our listeners, if you enjoy the podcast, please go ahead and subscribe. That way, all of these episodes will be sent directly to the device of your choice. You can also follow along on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and then, of course, you should read the Conduit Street blog. But for County Executive Jessica Fitzwater and Michael Sanderson, this is Kevin Kinnally signing off, and we will talk to you soon.